Hello everyone. Today I will be featuring the upcoming Tier 7 Royal Navy DD, the Cossack. First thing you might notice, look at the back turret. You notice that horrible firing angle. You see how I can't turn the guns forward? Yeah, we're gonna return to that in just a bit. This Tier 7 Cossack is pretty much identical to the Gadjah Mada, except it's apparently a later design. Or I don't know if it's an earlier design, it might be a later design, I don't really care. Ultimately, the ship I'm going to be comparing it to the most to is the Gadjah Mada, because they are so very similar. Except, of course, the Cossack is like a cheap knockoff version of an excellent ship. This is how much broadside you have to give. Well, even more than this to be able to use the back gun. The Gadjah Mada is, of course, famous for its back turret. The back turret that has 360 degrees turning, meaning you can shoot almost directly forward. On this ship, there's a secondary turret where the back turret normally is, and the back turret has been moved all the way to the back of the ship, as you can see, and that means the firing angles are complete garbage. I will get to the guns in just a bit. Let's start off first. It has 500 health more than the Gadjah Mada. It has 6 km conceal with full stealth build, meaning 100 meters better. In return though, it has 200 meters worse air spotting, so a bit of a trade-off there. They have exactly the same speed, except the Gadjah Mada turns slightly faster and with a slightly tighter turning circle. The AA on both these ships is garbage, not really worth discussing, but it's pretty much identical. And the guns. They're identical in every single way, except one of the main things that makes the Gadjah so incredible is the forward firing angles, and as you can see, these forward firing angles are completely butchered on the ship. So you see, I can only bring really my front guns to bear. You struggle to bring your third turret to bear because you pretty much have to give perfect broadside to do so. Now, worth noting is that you still have the Gadjah Mada's weakness of having terrible firing angles on the front gun. But now you also have terrible firing angles on the back gun. So on the Cossack, you have 2 turrets with terrible firing angles, both the front and the back turret. So this basically means you can only shoot when you're giving close to perfect broadside. So that's a huge downside. And another thing is, of course, the torpedoes. I launched 4 torps. That's all my torps. First of all, you can't launch narrow spread. You can only launch one at a time or widespread. There is no narrow spread option, which is a bit awkward considering it's my most used spread. So I literally have to artificially or manually make it a narrow spread so I can launch the torps. These are not deep water torps since we're not Pan-Asians, but in return you only have 4 torpedoes. These are 61 knots, 8 km range, exactly the same as Gadjah Mada, same damage as well. The difference is you launch 4 of them. The Gadjah Mada launches 10. It has a 2x5. It has 2x5 launchers, meaning it can launch 10 torps at a time. It has a 120-second reload. You have a 96 on the Cossack. So 24 seconds faster reload is not nearly enough to make up for the fact that you are literally losing 60% of your torpedo power. So this is a huge downgrade. You can see here I'm trying to launch a narrow spread, but you can't. There's only single and wide. And who would want to launch a wide spread with 4 torps? I mean, that is so damn awful. It's hard to even describe how awful that is. You note, by the way, that the torpedo angles are also horrible. You can't launch the torps forward or backwards almost at all. It's an extremely narrow, almost full broadside angle that you can only use. You see how terrible this angle is? This is once again a huge problem, because it means in knife fights it's extremely hard to use these torpedoes because, well, you have to give full broadside, and any DD you're fighting of course knows if you give full broadside you're about to torp. I mean, it should be pretty obvious. So these are already pretty big downsides. We're already talking about some pretty damn big downgrades here. We're losing gun power because of the angles, we're losing torque power, and finally we get to another of the big issues. You see how bad, by the way, the front firing angle. I can't use my front gun here. You see how bad this angle is? That's the same thing the Gadjah Mada has. But the problem is, of course, the Cossack also has a terrible back firing angle, which means you have 2 turrets that are constantly going to be a struggle to make them work. And finally, what I was talking about, the smokes. One of the great things about the Gadjah Mada is the ability to basically leap from smoke to smoke and pretty much permanently smoke yourself up. Pan-Asian smokes are absolutely god tier, and having the Pan-Asian, the Gadjah Mada has 70-second duration smokes on an 80-second cooldown, and they bloom for 30 seconds. So it means basically you have 10 seconds of downtime. If you run some flags or jack of all trades, you can cut that downtime to only a couple of seconds, but ultimately we're talking about the 10-second downtime between smokes. In return, Cossack has Royal Navy smokes, and the Royal Navy smokes are pretty much garbage. 160-second cooldown, this is running premium consumables, 160-second cooldown with the 85-second duration. So even if you run premium smokes, half the time your smoke won't even be available. In fact, you have as much downtime between your smokes as a full duration Gadjah Mada smoke lasts. That's how much downtime you have between your smokes. These smokes also only bloom for 20 seconds at a time, unlike Pan-Asian smokes that bloom for 30 seconds. So you also lose 50% in smoke size that you can spread out and basically benefit both yourself and your team. So that's another huge downgrade, and that's of course additional smoke duration that you could be using, because 10 seconds of bloom time means 10 seconds of additional smoke time that you can use for yourself. So ultimately Pan-Asian smokes have pretty much the same duration as these Royal Navy smokes. The difference is that Pan-Asian smokes of course have half the cooldown. So another huge downgrade. Once again, I want to shoot this guy and turn away, but as soon as I start turning even a bit, my front gun can no longer shoot him. I do land some of my... Once again, I wanted to use a narrow spread. I would have loved to use a narrow spread in there, but I single launched them one at a time, and I did manage to get the hits in. Some Duke of York HE obviously absolutely shreds my ship, but I do have managed, thanks to the HE spam, getting fires. Of course, they have this, it's exactly the same guns as the Gadjah, so it's a great fire starter. But I have managed to force his repair, and then I hit him with torps, and now he's flooding to death. So I can kind of just kite and watch him burn to death. So this game, well, once he dies, I think the game will end. They have 50 points. This guy is about to die, and he dies, and they have 0 points, and the game ends. 110k damage, mostly thanks to torpedoes, flooding, whatever. Fundamentally, nothing I really did this game I couldn't have done better in the Gadjah Mada. The initial torp on the Akatsuki, well, I wouldn't have needed to torp him if I was in the Gadjah Mada, because with the Gadjah Mada you can just push in and have all 3 of your turrets pointed forward, and I could just have shot him. I could have killed him with gunpowder. I wouldn't even have needed the torps. But because, once again, the awkward turret angles and turret positioning, the fact that you lose that awesome back turret position and have to give place to a secondary turret instead, means that, well, you kind of lose a third of your gunpowder most of the time when you play this ship. The secondary turret is also completely garbage. It has a range of 4.7 kilometers, so obviously that secondary turret will almost never actually fire and never actually be useful. So in terms of gunpowder, you kind of be prepared to give up a third compared to Gadjah Mada's gunpowder. Looking at the detailed report, we did top the scoreboard. It was tier 7 matchmaking, so that's of course always favorable to us, but this was kind of a one-sided game. The XP is pretty good, mostly because I did a fair amount of damage before this game ended. In fact, detailed report, this was only a 7.5 minute game, so a very, very quick game. And you can see just how much damage fires and flooding did. 46,000 of my damage was from that, the rest from torps. You don't really get nearly as much gun damage in this ship as you do in the Gadjah. That's simply because, once again, the Gadjah can move from smokes to smoke. This thing spends half the time without smokes because it doesn't have the same ability. And moving around in the open and gunboating in the open is not something the Gadjah/Cossack is particularly good at, because they are fairly big DDs and they can get wrecked pretty hard if you attempt to do that. So you're gonna lose a lot of gunpowder. The torpedoes are of course not nearly as good. You're giving up 60% of your torpedo power. You only have 4 torps on a 96-second cooldown compared to Gadjah Mada's 10 torps. So you're not going to get nearly as much torpedo damage either. They're not deep water either, of course, which can be both good and bad. Good in the sense that I hit the Akatsuki, not that I really needed to. My torp did 3k damage to the Akatsuki, so I mean, once again, if I'd been able to bring my back turret to bear, I would have just shot him instead. So that's a debatable trade-off. Losing out on the concealment when torping other ships is of course a bit awkward. And once again, and the smoke sustain. The smoke sustain is another huge downgrade. You almost have to, I guess, spec into Superintendent, something you don't really need on Pan Asian DDs because they have like 5 smokes without it. So ultimately, I have christened the Cossack the Ballsack because I think it's absolute garbage. Not recommended. They really need to change this ship significantly. Sorry about my phone. They really need to change this ship significantly for me to give any sort of recommendation. As of right now, I officially christen it the Ballsack, and it gets a big fat not recommended stamp from me. Anyway, that was all for me. I hope you guys enjoyed it.